Hello and welcome to our last Confer Zoom session of the semester. Mr. D here. If you don't know who I am, that's good. I'm your professor. We're finishing up our fourth quarter this week. And as you can see here, we're modules fourth quarter. We are now in week 12. So we're going to go down under. I won't do that stupid accent and sound like an idiot. We'll go down under and go visit Australia. Go about 1,500 miles off the coast of Australia to New Zealand, and then explore the South Pacific with many, many islands, and maybe we'll find Tom Hanks back there. It looks like we got two boats that picked up Tom Hanks from his castaway island in my background there. So what we're working on this week, oh, that's South Asia, that's the wrong section, that should go up here. That's Jakarta, it goes up there. So what we're working on this week is looking at Australia and Oceania. Oceania are the collective islands that stretch from Guam and Papua New Guinea all the way to Hawaii and then down to Easter Island, which is the very, very tip of the Polynesian island, well, not Polynesian, the South Pacific Islands. There are countries here called Melanesia. There's an area called Polynesia. There's a lot of different island groups in this region. Many have some similar cultures, but of course they are different. Languages are different, excuse me. So we're going to look at those this week. Okay, so here's chapter 14's overview. I got to take off that Jakarta thing I just put on there because that's the last week's work. Okay, so you can see here we're working on the South Pacific and Australia. Here's the conference Zoom meeting you're in right now. And then chapter 14 is the direct video talking about all of these specific topics, including chapter 4 preview. And the dates, don't worry about the dates. Everything is due this Friday, the 18th of December. So the section about Pacific Islands and coral reefs or atolls is kind of cool. It's a nice little short essay question that is dealt with in the 23rd minute. And defining some of these areas here. Okay, so all the way through there, and then there's exam 4 preview, which is a different video. Okay, and then of course you have your free textbook stuff, your videos, or your audiobooks or audio tune, whatever they call them, and then here's your homeworks. Then of course, nice pictures of Tom Hanks and Castaway. And the reason I bring up Castaway a lot is because when I lived in Gastonia, North Carolina, my friend was part of actually he was the, what is it called? Aboriginal Studies Director at our museum. And he was one of these people who, knows so much stuff about prehistory and pre-technology, and he was a primitive technology specialist. So the people who were doing the Castaway movie reached out to him and a couple of his buddies and then brought him over to Mexico, put him on an island and say, get off the island with this stuff. So Steve was one of these people that was, part of the movie to help Tom Hanks get off the island. So, and it was a really cool big deal back when it was popular. So, and of course we love that movie because it talks about anthropology a little bit. It talks about survival techniques, plus it's really beautiful areas, and it's kind of cool. And then it deals with Texas too, which is kind of fun. So all set? Okay, good. All right, so let's move on here. And again, this will open up tomorrow night. It's a little, open up a little earlier, I think, this week, Wednesday, midnight Wednesday, it's tomorrow morning actually, and it'll be opened up until Friday evening. Okay, the next thing on the item here should be our Confer Zoom session, and again the same stuff is there, just copy that over for you. And let's see, Shabria had some fun this morning looking at some of these videos, not all of them, but some of them. Okay, there's a nice long playlist, so you don't have to watch all of them. Again, they are kind of short, but a lot of the second half here talks about or shows these tribal or island culture challenges. Okay, it's not like a war dance sort of. They call them war dances, but they're sort of like challenges and shows of machoism or women, as Shabria has talked about. She found one with women doing the same thing. It's sort of defending your island, asking your challenger to come and meet me in a big physical duel, and the Hakas, with this New Zealand, the famous one, New Zealand, they have all sorts of different names for these, depending on which island group you're from. And they also show you some military stuff too. The Sipi Tau is the one, I forget which island that one is from. But anyway, these are really cool. Just check out, don't have to watch all of them, but it's kind of cool to see those. And then there's the war dance challenges. There they are, the separate ones. And then in your what's it called? The slideshow, I have in there like celebrities and people that we as Westerners understand and know that are from Australia or the South Pacific or the Pacific Islands that are famous sort of in our culture, including The Rock. And then this guy, Jonah Lomu, was like the best rugby player ever. He's like the Bo Jackson. I'm old, I know. He's like the Shaquille O'Neal of basketball. He's huge, he's big, he's strong, and he just dwarfs everybody. The Shaq, if you want to call him the Shaq, but he's faster. So he was really a wonder to watch play. My brother's a big rugby guy, so we used to watch like videos of him a lot with my brother. So, so that's, you know, and again, the big sport in this region is cricket or rugby, because of the British sailors who sailed around the world and deposited their culture all these places here. Okay, your exam coming up is going to be 3 parts. Okay, the first part is based upon the 4th quarter material, and it's the multiple choice and the slides and things you've seen earlier before. Part B is a little different. This comes directly from your student learning outcomes on your syllabus. Okay, so each syllabus, each class you have these things called student learning outcomes. They're things that we try and teach you that the state wants you to know. If you finish this class, you should understand these topics. And I've picked out 18 questions, various points, as you can see, but they cover the topics that are in our SLOs or SLOs. Okay, so you'll have 2 attempts for that one. The highest score, the highest score will be recorded. And then part C is a 10-point, 1 essay question. You get to choose 1 out of 5 essays. Okay, so each one of these essays is going to be like 2 points each, but don't worry about how it's scored. I'm going to call them as 10 points. And if you turn in an essay, I'm going to grade the first one I see as 10 points. So you get to choose. So please don't write more than 1 essay. Okay, and we'll go over some of those today. All right, so that's our exam preview, and I'm going to open up the quizzes in a separate window so I could read them and not show them to everybody here. And in the meantime, I'm going to bring over our slideshow and start talking about, you know, following along a little bit with the chapter, but I already have a video of that. Shabria, do you want to learn anything specific of this part of the world? Since you're the one here, I will cater to you.
I don't have any specifics. I would like to know more about Australia in general, though.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so what do you know about Australia so far?
Movies. Just the movies with I'm trying to think of what movies I saw with that outback, with people living out Aborigines. Is that what they're?
Aboriginal, yeah.
Aboriginal people.
That's what they're called.
Yeah. Living.
Aborigines are a title that most groups who were there first are called Aborigines.
Okay.
And then in Australia, and it comes from, I don't know if it comes from Australia, but it's been popularized by the Australian native population.
Mhm.
They call them Aborigines, and that's sort of a term. Aboriginal is a general term. And then the Aborigines are, you know, when people think Aborigines, they think Australia.
Yes. Mhm. So I guess
Yeah.
about that part and how it to me looks like a huge giant desert. So
Mhm.
in most parts.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Yeah. What is going on with my phone? Turn off. Of course, it doesn't do that, but you know, it'd be nice if I just turn off and it turns off. All right, so we're going to head over to Australia. We'll look at some of the climate and some of the areas there. You could see on this map of the region, this is the regional map we're looking at here. Okay. Australia is a huge island, and it actually has hundreds of smaller islands all around the coast, including the largest one, Tasmania. This is a pretty big landmass. It's slightly smaller than the continental United States. If you throw in Alaska, we're bigger. I think it's slightly smaller, about the same size as the United States. The northern section is the hot, humid section of the country, because again, you're at you're in the tropics, right? You're in the tropics. You're in the 20s and teens in terms of latitude. Okay, so that was at 10. Is that the 10 mark? Yeah, here's the equator here going through Indonesia. So you're at 10 degrees south latitude, all the way to 20 degrees there. And I guess 40, where's 20? I can't read these things. Let's go 15, 30, 45. Is that what it says? 15, 30, 45. It's too light for me to see. I'm sorry. There's the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 22 and a half. Okay, so this must be 30 or 35, 30 probably. So this region and this Tropic of Capricorn, think of that as Havana or Cabo San Lucas, okay, for the Northern Hemisphere where we live. It's the same thing again, but it's flipped to the Southern Hemisphere. Okay, so the equator's right here. So right through here somewhere, there's the line right through there. And as you go further south, it gets cooler. But first you got to go through the tropics and then to the desert regions like we have with Cabo San Lucas. We have Southern California, Nevada. And then as you get further away, it gets cooler and chillier. Okay. And then you get to New Zealand, which is 40 degrees, and you're now looking at the San Francisco latitude and north. So this is sort of like the coastal, let's see, this is sort of like, well, this is a little warmer because you got the warm ocean waves, ocean currents coming down this way. It's not as cold as British Columbia, but it sort of looks like British Columbia, slightly warmer. Okay. And then you have thousands of islands stretched way across the Pacific Ocean. Okay. Papua New Guinea is the island of New Guinea is split into two. One part of it is Indonesia, and the second part is the country called Papua New Guinea. It's a very mountainous area, a lot of languages. There's like thousands of languages on this island. There's a lot of native Aboriginal people, small cultural groups that are still strong and still going strong, isolated from the outside world. There's one city called Port Moresby, whatever that was. And it's a mountainous, but it's very tropical as well. Okay. And then you have these island groups, Micronesia, Melanesia. You have Palau, the Marshall Islands to the north, Kiribati. It's this big section that crosses the date line. And then groups like Vanuatu, which is famous for a volcano. What is it? New Caledonia, which is French. So the French colonized that zone. There's Fiji. There's it's too small for me to read because I'm too old. Tuvalu, you got Tonga, there's the American and British Samoas, if you ever heard of those places. And then the further east you go, there's French Polynesia all the way over here. Okay, there's the Society Islands, which is where, if you've read Mutiny on the Bounty, that's where they left Captain Bligh or something like that. Okay, and there's, I can't even read that little one. And then further all the way to the east here, there's Easter Island. It is the furthest east of these volcanic islands. And then here's the island set of Hawaii, which is, again, Oceania. It is part of this oceanic island system. Culturally, before the US took over by revolution in 1898, it was its own territory, no country. It is in the center, not the center, but the middle of the Pacific Ocean, give or take. So it has cultures from Asia, Japan, Okinawa, the US. You had some Russian, there's some British settlers and stuff like that, but it's mostly native population with a lot of maybe Japanese, which is there now, Japanese descendants. So, but this is definitely part of Oceania. No two ways about it. It is just like these other places, volcanic in nature for the most part. And it stretches from the big island of Hawaii all the way to Midway, which is the famous battle in World War II, a couple movies. And then that island chain dips below the ocean because it's away from the hotspot, and it moves all the way up towards Russia and the Aleutian Islands as all underwater sea mountains or seamounts. But again, this is your South Pacific. Okay, and there's Guam, there's the Mariana Islands right here, the trenches done there. But throughout history, this has not been settled that long ago in terms of human history. I think there's a map in our slideshow showing you the dispersion, and these people are absolutely amazing, brave. They got on boats, big old ships like you see in Moana, the movie Moana, and they just go out into the ocean, and if they hit an island, they live. If they missed, you never heard of them again. Okay, unfortunately, it's so big. Okay. There's New Zealand. The southern island is the more mountainous of the islands. It has the volcano, it has hot springs, the big gigantic fault that is sort of like the San Andreas Fault is right along there. That's why you hear earthquakes around Christchurch a lot. The northern part is, there's a trench to the north, so it's a little more volcanic. There's one volcano right there. And then Australia is a really, really old rock geology wise, right? It's really old. It's a craton. It's sort of in the center. There's not much tectonics around there. And most of the population, as you're going to see, it's like a donut. It's on the east coast, the southeast especially, from Adelaide all the way up to Brisbane is where the most of the population lies. And then you got this one city all the way out to the west coast. It's sort of like San Diego. It's called Perth. The climate is just like San Diego, just like Cape Town, South Africa. Okay, just like Concepcion and Chile. Okay, for all these reasons we've talked about earlier, but we have the same exact weather patterns, the same exact ocean currents. It has a cold current coming up from Antarctica, just like we have a cold current coming down from Alaska. It's like one of the best places in terms of weather. It is so isolated from the rest of humanity because you have, 2,500 miles of flat desert rock. You have oceans, all sorts of things around Perth. And when that Malaysian airline disappeared and went down, this whole area of the South Indian Ocean is so isolated. I mean, from Perth, it's still hours and hours and hours to go out to here to try and find that plane. Okay. The northern part of Australia, again, as you go further north, it's dry along this coast. It's sort of like Cabo San Lucas and Baja. But then you get down to the southern Mexico where it gets more and more humid. And you get rainforests to the north, the very tippy top north area. Okay. I don't believe I just said tippy top in an academic class. That was really nice. Yeah. You can see here, there's slight mountains in the center of Australia. And the most famous town is called Alice Springs. And people think it's really close to Uluru or Ayers Rock, that famous big gigantic monolith that sits in the middle of the Australia desert, but it's still 4.5 hours away. So it's like going to southern Utah from where we live. Okay, and everyone flies into Victorville and they drive 4.5 hours to southern Utah to go see Bryce and Zion, and that's sort of the distance there. But there's no Las Vegas in the middle. It's all desert. So that's your overview, the political overview. You can see here the mountains on Papua New Guinea are the tallest ones in the region. You got the Great Dividing Range, which stops all the moisture coming in from the Pacific coast, the Tasmanian Sea here, the Tasman Sea, sorry, and drops it on Sydney and Canberra. So this is why we have a lot of people on the east southeast coast, because the mountains sort of act as a blockage, blocking the moisture, and the further away you get from the coast, the drier and drier it gets. Okay. Speaking of dry, there's the Great Australian Desert, and everyone else in the world calls it the outback. And Australians consider the outback anything outside of their house, outside of their town, right? Anything outside of civilization is the outback for them. And the rest of the world thinks outback, blooming onions, guy with a big giant knife with an accent, and big giant steaks and chicken and flat desert like this. To be honest, right? That's what we think of the outback, because that's what was sold to us in the 80s and 90s when we started paying attention to Australia as Americans, right? The outback, the big giant knife guy, and Crocodile Dundee, you know, all that stuff. But Crocodile Dundee was not through here, because he dealt with crocodiles and water species. Obviously, he's not there. So you can see here what the vegetation looks like. Okay, much of this grassland and shrubland, it's sort of like Southern California where we live. Okay, and then just flat desert, just plain old desert in the middle. And remember, desert doesn't mean gigantic sand dunes. Deserts, as we're finding out now, it's cold at night, right? It's chilly and cold at night. And it's warm during the day most of the time, most deserts. But here, this is one of these deserts where it's cold at night, hot in the daytime, really, really hot, as we saw last year. And then it dries it out, just like we do in Southern California, and then you have fires, brush fires. Let's see, rainforest, of course, to the northeast where the rain comes in, okay? And you have along the coastlines, close to the tropics. But these are where the storms come from. The general weather pattern and general movement of the ocean currents come from the what's called the equator. And as you go away from the equator, it starts to move southward away from the equator towards colder territory. So it brings the moisture all along the northeast coast of Australia. And that's where they have the rainforests. Again, the hills and mountains also stop some of that rain from moving inland, so it drops it right there. Remember, that's called orographic precipitation. Orographic is one word. Yeah, or supposedly. All right. Other regional landforms, we have the gigantic mountains of southern New Zealand. These are the ones with snow and glaciers. You have Papua New Guinea, which is just like this, but not as much snow. There are certain mountains in Papua New Guinea that are over 12,000 feet. But again, you don't get too much snow as you do in New Zealand. Here is something called an atoll. It's the fringing coral reef that sits around an ancient volcano, an ancient dead volcano. And as you see in the slides, we're going to talk about Charles Darwin, or Chucky D, as we call him in science. And Chucky D went around on this boat ship called the HMS Beagle. HMS Beagle. There we go. That is Her Majesty or His Majesty's ship. And there was an expedition around the world. This is where we went to the Galapagos Islands, started to have the idea of evolution and survival of the fittest and adaptive genes and stuff like that. Adaptive, not genes, that was Lyle. Adaptive to nature and adaptive to your environment. So those who did adapt succeeded and passed on their genes. Those who could not adapt died or got killed and did not pass on their genes. That's called the survival of the fittest. But see, Chucky D went on the boat, the ship, across the Pacific Ocean. It was a big, long expedition. And throughout the South Pacific, he started seeing these islands, and he started putting together a hypothesis based upon just observation, okay, where you saw this volcano first, and around the volcano, there's a little tiny reef called a fringing reef. And as the volcanoes got further away from the hot spot where the magma came up, wave action eroded the volcano. It also subsided a little bit because the magma is not pushing it up, so it subsides, sinks a little bit. And as it sinks, the volcano sinks. But the reef around the edge is living coral. And coral wants to stay near the surface. And as that volcano drops, the coral builds upon itself. And then you get this lagoon in the middle, these gorgeous lagoons, an old ancient volcano, and then surrounding reef systems. Eventually, if this gets further and further away from the hotspot, the volcano will subside below the ocean because of the wave action there. The fringing reef still grows towards the surface, and then you get these things called atolls, ATOLLS. And they're coral reef islands with an empty center, but below the water is the volcano. Let's see if I can find those quickly. Here we go. There's, next couple slides here. Okay, so it shows you the hypothesis that Charles Darwin had. Okay, there's your eruption of magma pushing up the floor. Eventually that magma pushes up above the ocean and you get an island, usually a volcanic island. And then sometimes if the volcano dies, then the ocean waves erodes the volcano and you get a flat top mountain. Okay. Sometimes these volcanoes will have these fringing coral reefs, so reefs around the edge of the island. And as the magma dissipates, it starts to sink, it erodes, and the fringing reef still grows around the outside. Eventually, the volcano will subside below the ocean, and then there's your atoll, ATOLL. These empty, sort of circular type island chains. In the middle is the volcano that's underwater. Okay. So if you know anything about coral reefs, and if you don't know anything, watch the movie. Which one, Shabria? Which movie should they watch? Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo shows you coral reefs. You have the sun coming in. It sort of describes all of these things here. For a coral reef to be constructed, you need ocean water or salt water. You need warm water, so you need to be near the tropics or have warm currents blowing in, like the Great Barrier Reef. You need clean water. You can't have pollution in there. And you have to have shallow water so the sunlight can penetrate the ocean. And maybe 200 meters down tops is where the light penetrates down to, and that's where you have the coral. Okay, you can see where they are in the world. We have a lot in the Caribbean. We have some in the Sea of Cortez, or as us in the United States call it, the Gulf of California, but the Sea of Cortez. You have them on volcanic little islands like the Galapagos off the coast of Ecuador. Look at all of these in the South Pacific and Central Pacific. And that it stretches all the way over to Australia. There's the Great Barrier Reef right here. And then all the way into the Guam area, Philippines, the Filipino Sea. And this is where we saw the Chinese building their military bases on these atolls last week. It goes all the way into the Indian Ocean, the Maldives, or the Maldives, I forget how, I don't know how you pronounce it, the Maldives. These are atolls that go all the way from pretty much the Indian coast down to Diego Garcia. And then you have them all in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and along the East African coast. And there's a couple of them off the coast of Brazil. Okay, notice there's nothing up to the north or the south. The water's too cold. Bermuda does have them, even though it's really far north, because you have the warm ocean Gulf Stream that blows by. Okay, but the South Pacific is, as you can see here, the South and West Pacific are the places where coral reefs are the most obvious. Okay. So this is what it looks like, the coral reef stuff. There's more better slides, larger slides with some pictures. You can see here that this is in Tahiti. The clouds over the island. So in order to have fresh water at these places, you need to have hills, because the hills will cause the orographic precipitation to fall, right? That's why they're all green here. Now that water has to run off, and that's fresh water. And again, fresh water and coral reefs don't work. And that's why you have that little opening there, because the fresh water from the mountains come down out to the ocean. Okay, and that's a blue lagoon, right? That's a blue lagoon right through here, because it's shallower water. And this is where you can go fishing. There's a lot of coral on the bottom. There's sharks go in here because the fish are sort of trapped. It's really cool, except for the sharks. And there's Tom Hanks. You can see the Castaway movie talking to Wilson. Here is the old volcanic, remember, it's a volcanic island. And then off the coast where he cuts his foot and he tries to escape the coral reef, fringes the coral reef island here. And I don't know why he didn't take his boat and go this way, but he wanted to go that way because I guess the script says you got to go that way. So there's your fringing reef as it starts to sink. Again, the coral builds upon itself, stays near the surface. You get these islands here, the Society Islands, which is off the coast of Australia a little bit. And then you get those nice Hilton hotel chains that cost like $500 a night. This was not my honeymoon. This is one of my old students who gave me these pictures. And you can see the shallow lagoon and the deeper ocean on the other side. Oh, looks nice. Anyway, and then here your Maldives, the Indian Ocean. You can see all these coral reefs sitting in the middle of the ocean. All underneath there's a hill or volcanic rock in the center of those atolls. Okay, so those are the atolls. Those are questions about the atolls. Let's go on and talk about Australia, because that's what Shabria wanted to learn about. So we'll look at the climate of Australia first, then we'll look at some of the cities. Well, the climate of the whole region, I should say. This is harder to see, but again, as you go further away from the equator, obviously it gets cooler. You can see all these cities to the north here. These are all along the equator, equatorial tropical zone. That's why you have pretty flat temperature lines. But depending on where you are, you get the rainy season and the dry seasons. The rainy season and somewhat dry seasons. Look at this one in Samoa. Samoa is all the way over here, right there. You definitely get a rainy season, and then you definitely get a dry season. So The hotels in Samoa will be really expensive in June, July, and in May and August. And they're going to be rather cheap in December, January, February, March because of the rain, right? That's how it works. Alice Springs in the middle of the Australian continent is far, far, far from oceans. And that's why you see that biggest spike in terms of climograph, okay? Where everyone else is somewhat near the ocean, that moderates the temperature. So you see these more like the flat lines. Okay, Wellington is a little further south, so it does get colder, just like Sydney is. But Alice Springs in the middle of the continent, far from an ocean, you get really high temperatures and you get really cool temperatures. And again, Alice Springs, just like where we live, barely any rain. Okay, Perth. There's Perth. Perth is, what color is that? That is the darker green. That's the Mediterranean summer dry. So again, it is just like San Diego, just like Los Angeles, where you get a couple months of rain during their winter. Okay, remember their winter is opposite of ours. You could tell everyone's in the winter in the southern hemisphere by these lines bowing down during June and July when it's cooler. So Perth, again, nice and warm, perfect climate almost. It gets rain 4 or 5 months of the year, just like San Diego and Los Angeles, and it's isolated. Here's Darwin. Darwin's to the north. That is the savanna season. Again, a lot of rain and then no rain, and then a lot of rain. Darwin is the closest city in Australia to Asia. Hence, you have a very large population of Asian descendants in Darwin. So Chinese, Filipino, Indonesian, Malaysian. You have a big, gigantic mixture of people in northern Australia. You're actually closer to Singapore and the Philippines than you are to your capital. And again, you have a big giant desert in the way. Little tiny section with a monsoon climate there. That CFA is sort of like the southeast United States. And then you go further, it's a little cooler. Marine West Coast is CFB. And there you go, that's the New Zealand section. And you really can't see any of these here. They're all in the tropical rainy season climates. Okay, a little better there. Okay. For those who study biogeography, right? Biogeography is the study of biological species on the planet. There's this famous line called the Wallace line. Okay. There's the Huxley line, there's other ones, but the Wallace line is this biogeographic boundary that separates Asian animals from Australian animals. And they think he thinks they drew the line here because a long time ago when the sea level was lower, the land masses, you can see the land masses in pink, connected Borneo and Celeb and Java to the mainland. And that's, if you follow this all the way to the north, that's the Alaskan Bering Strait land bridge that brought Native American populations to the Americas. Okay, so, but it was very difficult for animals and stuff to cross from one side of this landmass to the other. Some did somehow, by rafting usually. But that Wallace line is the line that they drew to sort of separate Australian fauna from Asian fauna. So, and again, you have different lines. You have different scientists going, no, maybe it's over here. And then Ledecker says, no, well, I have evidence that it's over here. And that's what science is about. Each person has different observations. They try and make their best recommendation based upon their observations. But And there's the Huxley one. So this is the reason why we have kangaroos and what else we have down there. Koala bears, the crazy platypus, which I've heard saying God's joke, because there's so many different parts of different animals and mammals and reptiles on this thing. Like put all the spare parts together and you got a platypus. But again, the poisonous snakes, spiders, and all the other things that can kill you in Australia, isolated again from big predators from the mainland. Okay. Rabbits and feral cats. Yeah. The British settlers brought rabbits to Australia, and they overwhelmed because they had natural predators, but not really. They overwhelmed the agriculture, the vegetation. So there's a famous fence that the Australians built called the rabbit-proof fence that goes way across the continent of Australia, trying to keep rabbits out. There's a great movie called What was it called? The Rabbit-Proof Fence. It's a great movie called that one too. There's a couple of great movies about Australia. Do you know any, Shabria?
I remember some, but I don't remember the names of them, to be honest.
Okay.
I can't.
You can't. Don't want to try. I wanted to just take a little quick break here, not to bore you, and just sort of break this stuff up. So under our extra credit postings, which are due, when is this due by? Wednesday night. So tomorrow night is the last day to post anything here. If you go down to the Foreign Films list, I think I have. That doesn't happen. Okay, I'll pull it up in our Google Drive directly and I'll make sure that works. Maybe it's in here. There we go. Foreign Films would do the Google Drive one, the Google Docs. Australia, let's see, North America, Latin America, Caribbean. I thought I had some good ones in here, but I might have left them out. South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia. Okay, so there's Rabbit-Proof Fence, and Dos Mil Dos. White Whale Rider, which is a really good movie. And we have a picture of that actress, Keisha Castle Hughes, Game of Thrones actress, by the way. Tracks, which is pretty kind of cool. It's a trek across the West Australian desert. That's it. Oh, we need more people. So if you have any Australian movies that you liked, I want to put them on this list so future students just like you have something cool to watch about Australia and Oceania. Okay. Now, Mutiny on the Bounty, South Pacific, those 1950s movies, they don't count. They're more, anglicized versions of the native peoples all over the place. Not every native woman is like this bombshell with, I'm not going to go there, but that's what the 1950s movies were showing you.
Finding
and again,
Nemo?
most of you never watched this. Finding Nemo, yeah, we should put Finding Nemo on there. That's right. Because, my kids know 43 Wallaby Way, Sydney, Australia. They know that. They know where Nemo lives. So, yeah. See, I haven't seen that movie in years and I still know the address. Dory, goodness. Anyway, if you have any additions, please let me know so we could add this to it. There's a, anyway, I'll skip that. Okay. So Australia is obviously the biggest piece of land, but again, there's not many people there. They're all around the outside the coast. Okay. You have environmental problems, of course. There's wildfires, as we see every winter. their summer, our winter, just like we have, the huge temperatures, the 128-degree temperatures they get. It's been exacerbated in the last decade or two from global climate change. But what we see in California is almost the same thing we see in Australia in terms of climate change and problems. The most famous tourist destination in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef. There's a lot of problems going on with the Great Barrier Reef, including having the ocean acidity change over time, which will then change the ecology of the barrier reef, the warming of the oceans, because coral needs to be in a certain little zone of temperature to thrive. And right now we're moving up out of that zone, and you're starting to get bleaching and mass death on these coral reefs. Enough to where the Australian government was really, really concerned about losing the whole thing the last 5 years.
Weren't they doing kind of like plugs where they were taking part of the coral reef and plugging it in to help
rejuvenate the deader areas? Yeah.
Octonauts.
Where'd you read that from? That's cool.
Octonauts.
Aquanauts? I hear your husband cheering in the background. See, these kid shows are pretty cool sometimes. The Octonauts are awesome. Oh my goodness, wow. I wish my kids were that. Well, no, I don't. That was tough. Those are tough years. 2, 3, 4 are tough years, folks. So, and apparently it doesn't get any better once they're teenagers. So there's that.
You just get time for yourself at that time instead of being
That's right.
at their beck and call every second.
Yes. So you could see here many of the problems that they're facing here in the South Pacific. Kiribati is like these other islands. They're low-lying, so they're a little drier because they don't have the mountains to stop the rain. They're suffering greatly from climate change. As the sea levels rise, there's nowhere for folks to go. I mean, you can see how far away they are from any other island. So these these environmental migrants have to go somewhere. And a lot of these countries are suing developing countries for polluting the atmosphere enough to where it's now affecting their life and their lifestyle.
Good for them.
You can see here, yeah, well, that's the only way that people will, especially people in the West, will understand this if it's financial hit on them. If not, no one cares. So unless you're hitting the pocketbook, that's how rich people change their actions, by hitting them in the pocketbook. Okay. I've gotten like 15 calls from North Carolina, all spam today. So you see a lot of these, again, having issues with climate change. And of course, also, the larger populations need more resources. And as your population grows on these small islands, there's nowhere to go. So you have overpopulation issues and problems. Papua New Guinea, the big gigantic island here with rainforests galore, more and more pressure to cut those rainforests down for fuel and to sell them somewhere else around the world, which then leaves your habitat at a loss, your animals are in trouble, which means then your small cultural groups are in trouble. And then finally, the famous example of invading species, the US islands of Guam and then Mariana Islands here. The brown tree snake, which was snuck aboard a cargo ship or hidden in some cargo and then dropped off from the Mariana Islands, are absolutely devastating the bird species. It used to be where you were at some of these islands and you could hear birds all over the place. And now you barely hear any birds because the snakes have no predators. So they're the ones killing all those birds. So that's a big deal, obviously. Okay. And so that's the physical stuff there, the issues, climate change, Oceania, you can see the storms. 2 years ago, 2018, we had one of the islands that the US protectorate was nailed by 185-mile-an-hour winds on this hurricane. It went right over the island, the whole island itself. So in the island, in the eye of the storm, the island was in the middle of that. And then it, this huge storm. So you have many problems, droughts, wildfires. Those places who do have glaciers are retreating, which means there's less water for the people who rely on those. Warming ocean surfaces means the corals are dying, rise in sea levels, which means people are leaving and being kicked off their land by flooding. And then again, the higher temperature of the ocean means stronger and more severe storms. So climate change is affecting this part of the world tremendously. Okay. Demographic numbers here. Obviously, Australia is the largest, but 24 million people. I mean, that's almost, you could fit 2 Australias in California, throw in Nevada, and you got the same amount of people as 2 Australias. It's by far the largest. Papua New Guinea is the second largest. And you can see how many Australia is one big giant desert, it seems. And then Nauru, obviously, you got a lot more people shoved on this tiny little island. Okay. The fertility rates, you can see the fertility rates again, 2.1 is the replacement rate for population. So Australia, being a westernized society with more developed economies, have a lower population fertility rate. So that means every woman has an average of 1.8 children in their lifetime. And 2.1 is the replacement number for that. You replace the husband, you replace the male, you replace the female, and that 1/10 is for kids dying, accidents, infant mortality, stuff like that. So the fertility rate. So there's the rate of natural increase is 2.1. Fertility rate is huge. Okay. Look at these. Some of these, Samoa has 5.1 kids per woman on average. Okay. Now that's not as bad as what we saw in sub-Sahara Africa, but it's still pretty dang high. And especially if you're living on an island where nowhere to go and expand to. Okay. You can see many of these islands are highly urbanized. Okay, because there's a lot of people, they have to live in cities and towns. Even Australia, I'm looking at Australia, almost 90%. So 9 out of 10 people in Australia live in a town or a suburb, and then that 10% live in the outback, I guess. Okay. The percent under 15, so look at this, Marshall Islands, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, these are really young populations. If 41% of your population is under 15, where are these people going to have jobs? Where are they going to live? How are they going to feed themselves and feed their families in 10, 15 years? And that is what you could see with demographics. This is a problem that is coming to these islands. Very young populations, right? 20, look at that, 20 for New Zealand. That's really, almost 20%. Sorry, that's not that bad. 41 is bad. And then New Zealand has a lot of older folks, okay, as does Nauru and Australia. So not as much as Japan. I think Japan was up in the 20s, 20%. And of course, net migration. Marshall Islands, you're losing 17 people per 1,000, obviously. If you have all those people expanding, they got to go somewhere, they leave your islands. Samoa, people are leaving Samoa, Tonga, Micronesia. Again, there's nowhere to go for this next generation, so they have to leave, and that means leaving your culture, leaving your past, leaving your history, leaving your grandma and grandpa, as we talked about last week with ancestor worship. okay? Leaving all you know, because there's nothing to do. There's no jobs, there's no possibilities. The island's shrinking, so you have to go somewhere else. And it looks like they're all going to New Zealand, okay, and Australia. Okay, so highly urbanized. There's that famous harbor of Sydney with the Opera House, the Onion Opera House, and the big Sydney Bridge. One of the best harbors in the world, Sydney Harbor. Again, it's the most polluted. As if you watch Nemo, you can't even see anything underwater. But that's right. There's Australia and Solomon Islands. You can see Australia again, a very barrel-shaped developing country, and Solomon Islands, a huge developing country. I'm sorry, Australia is developed. Solomon Islands are developing. And again, back 50 years ago, we used to call this first world and third world. And we don't do that anymore. Who wants to be called a third world country, right? We don't do that anymore. We call them developed and developing. All right, pause, turn off, mic, whatever this is. This is driving me nuts. Okay. So as we saw, the high birth rates, the low the growth from immigration, it's really, really helping some of these places. Okay, so going in and zooming in here, that's why I'm not on the slides. We're going into the two most populous locations in here, Australia and New Zealand. Okay, obviously there's Perth and its suburbs. And again, there's nothing besides these 6 towns anywhere else for thousands of miles, right? You're talking here. Okay. Starting in Adelaide, it gets a little warmer and moister. Adelaide's a big city in the south coast facing the Indian Ocean, or now we call this the Southern Ocean. The Australians said, you know what? We want to name our own ocean. We're going to call it the Southern Ocean. And that's pretty much anything circling Antarctica. Okay. The two gigantic, not gigantic, the two largest cities in Australia are Sydney and Melbourne. Okay. And just like the United States, they had trouble locating their capital city. Right. When we first started, our capital bounced around from New York to Princeton to Philadelphia to Monmouth, New Jersey to Trenton, all over the place. And then we had some sort of deal that said, you know what, we're going to move it to the one location. They got a deal, and it was nowhere near the big cities, which was kind of good. Here, they did the same thing. Sydney and Melbourne, the two big cities, are like, you know what, we want the capital. No, we want the capital. And, you know, let's make a deal. We'll put it not halfway between, but it's in the mountains. So it's not either place. And you can see here, it's far enough away from Sydney that it's not really part of Sydney. But along the Gold Coast here, all the way from Wollongong, it has to be an Aboriginal name. Wagga Wagga, Wollongong, all the way through Sydney, Newcastle. You could see the British, right? The Newcastle. All the way up to the Gold Coast, and there's Brisbane. And then there's the Sunshine Coast, and then Rockhampton. That sounds British, and Gladstone sounds British. This is all the way up to the northern coast, again, where you have the Great Barrier Reef, and then it turns really hot and humid. So you're talking now into Miami and Jacksonville and Havana type humidity. And then the last little town is called Port Douglas. Then there's Darwin, again, isolated from most other Australian cities and much, much closer to Indonesia and Southeast Asia than the rest of the country. This is East Timor is the newest country, well, one of the newest countries in the world. The Australians fought really hard politically for East Timor to be separate from the rest of Indonesia, and I think in the 2000s they were successful. I think it's a Christian country, maybe. Don't quote me on that, Shabria. You'll have to look that up yourself. I'm not sure why it's different, but I think it's a religious difference, maybe, and maybe some settlers were different. And there's Alice Springs right in the middle. There was this really cool show I watched on Netflix about this group of young pilots, like this family of pilots. They actually circumvented the whole coast by plane. They'd stop here and there, in towns and meet people, but it was a really cool trip. I think it was on Netflix, could have been on Amazon. So that's a really cool video of a movie if you want to watch it. It's like it's an hour, maybe an hour, 10 minutes, and it wasn't bad at all. I liked it. Of course, I love flying. So then New Zealand, and we'll head over to New Zealand. Okay. And New Zealand has 2 major islands. Again, the further south you go, the colder it gets, which in our brain doesn't work, right? Because everything we go south, it's hotter, but it's opposite. Again, it's other side of the equator. So Wellington is their big city. Auckland's their capital. And then Christchurch is a large city, a large town on the southern island. Okay. So when I was in East Asia, when you go to LAX airport, you'll see flights to mostly Auckland or Christchurch, mostly Auckland from here, and then from Southeast Asia and Asia, I saw places like Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch, direct flights from Seoul, South Korea, or from Ho Chi Minh City, which is kind of crazy. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. And the people I met in Vietnam that spoke English had this Australian and New Zealand accent, because those are the teachers they saw. Those are the English speakers they saw. So if your English teacher was from Scotland, you'd be speaking Scottish English, even though you might look Maori or Vietnamese or Indonesian. You'd speak with that accent, because that was your teacher. So, okay. So, and then the population, as you saw here, Papua New Guinea is, again, very, very populous, especially in the highlands, which is different than most other places. Okay. The last place we saw this difference, where you have higher populations in the highlands, was South and Central America. Remember, we saw Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, especially, Mexico, Guatemala. The larger populations are in the highlands because it's cooler. Again, you're right near the equator, so it's hot and humid. So if you go up a couple thousand feet, it's automatically cooler. Okay. And Papua New Guinea Islands, 8 million residents, remain one of the least urbanized populations. Again, they're not in the town, they're in the whole countryside. It's kind of cool. Okay. And there's Nauru, other things there. Solomon Islands, kind of cool. Growth rate, we saw the high growth rates already. Okay, here we go. All right, so here is the population as terms of, we have a dot map with relative proportional city sizes. And you can see Sydney and Melbourne are the 2 largest cities. Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth are the other 3, the second tier. And of course, everyone who's ever heard of Australia thinks Sydney is the only big city there. But Melbourne is the big financial capital also. It's a big city as well. And then little Canberra, little tiny capital city, is just for the politics. And the 2 trading cities are Melbourne and Sydney. All right, so again, the coast is where the people are. You got 1 or 2 rivers that are used for agriculture a lot as it reaches Adelaide. And then the interior is extremely dry, very flat to the south section here, like the flattest place on Earth is down through here, and then Perth and the coast is along the west coast there. Okay, this is the one I wanted to show you too. This is the, let me zoom out here, the settlement, the historical geography of settlement in the South Pacific. Okay, this comes from, I guess it comes from my anthropology wife. He said, you gotta put this in there. I was like, of course I gotta put this in there. Why wouldn't I put this in there? But for as little as 1,500 years ago, or 1,500 BC, so 3,500 years ago, which in terms of human population is not that long ago. That is like after the Chinese emperors, right? That is like the big Chinese, some of the Chinese dynasties. That's after Egypt, right? That's after some of the Toltec, not the Mayan, the Toltec before that. I think it's before the Toltec, but this is not that long ago. Okay, so around 1,500 before Common Era, or before Christ, before Common Era, you had folks moving across from the Philippines into the Marshall Islands. And if you've seen the movie Moana, this is what this story talks about, that movement, that migration of people. Okay, so some of the people like, you know what, I'm not too happy. I want to move on further. All right, so again, they move from New Britain, from this big island chain here, into the Solomon Islands, from 1,000 to 1,500 BC or BCE. Kept moving across to the Fiji Islands. Okay, and then 1500, and then 200 BC, all the way to Marquesas. I mean, how do you do this one? How on earth do you get on a big boat like that and just paddle out into the ocean and hit this island chain? I mean, it's amazing what these people could do. They could read the currents, they could read the birds, they could read the waves, and they could read, and they had these amazing mental maps that they traveled across thousands of miles of open ocean. I mean, there's no mountain saying, hey, make a left through the mountain there. There's no trees and rocks saying, hey, go 400 miles, make a left at the rock, and you're going to be at Hawaii. It doesn't work that way. These folks were absolutely amazing people. Smart as a whip. Okay. Because of the geography of where they were, they didn't have the advantages that we had in the fertile crescent in Central America in terms of crops and agriculture and stuff like that. But these people were just as smart as people in the Mayan culture and the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. They were just as smart. They just didn't have the material and the crops and stuff like that to make it more technology than they have now. Okay, that's one of the theories. You can see they moved all the way across the Pacific Ocean. Tahiti, look at that, 200 BC. That's 1,200, that's 2,200 years ago. People reached Tahiti. Easter Island, they said, you know what, that's not far enough. We're going to go further to Easter Island. And then some people think that these folks made it all the way to Peru and Ecuador, which is not that far away. I mean, it's much closer from Easter Island to South America than it is back to Australia. And then some folks, I don't know how they even knew that there were islands up here. They sailed a couple thousand miles north and hit the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, how does that happen? There's no satellites, there's no GPS, there's no planes to guide you. They just sailed into the deep ocean, said, you know, we're gonna hit an island. And they did. And you could actually see here in New Zealand, it was one of the last island chains to be founded, to be settled. Okay. AD 1000. So that is the time of, that is after Charlemagne, that is after the Greeks, after the Romans, after, well, maybe not Kublai Khan, after the charter, the Magna Carta in England, right? The Knights of the Round Table, all those people, somewhere around that time ago. That's where they settled. That's amazing to think about. That's really, really not that long ago. So this is a big giant triangular push through the island chains in the empty Pacific Ocean. Crazy. And then you don't even think about the storms they had to deal with, right? The hurricanes and the storms and the sharks and the starvation. And, you know, they went on these big giant ships and groups of ships. If you've seen Moana, right? People actually still do this today in recreating it. Obviously, they have compasses and maps, but some people do it without that stuff. It's been passed down them from generation to generation. So those Moana movies.
But that's where we different.
Yeah.
We're totally different because they were family-based and centered, and they worked as a team and had unity all together, where our mental set is not of that. It's to go build up, not go out.
Yes. In the United States, we have a different mindset. We are individualistic, which if you look at Vietnam and Southeast Asia and China and Japan, it's much more collective. The collective matters more than the individual. So that's a great point, Shabria. You were absolutely right. No wonder why we have some of the worst infections of coronavirus, right? I'll stop. I don't want to go there.
We can't do it.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah,
we can't even do
for the greater good.
No. Why would
greater
we do that?
good, we can't even.
No,
yeah.
It doesn't profit me,
Whereas
so what does it matter?
Yeah, but they all did it together, and we're gonna live or die as a society together, as a civilization, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, so Moana was my little girl's movie, and then she's like, no, I hate Moana now. Because, you know, she's too old and cool. But there's the people in the Pacific Ocean, and again, that's how scientists and anthropologists and geneticists think that people got across the Pacific and into Australia. Again, not that long ago, if you think about the big human picture. Okay. Then, of course, the Europeans came and made everything great. No, not really. But they came and they brought civilization. They expelled people from their own countries and put them into penal colonies. That's how Australia got mostly populated. There's some gold rush and things like that. The Aboriginal displacement, of course, the Europeans took the best land and pushed Aboriginals out into emptier spaces. European colonization, as we've talked about earlier, is not the best thing for the whole world. Yes, it spread a lot of cool stuff, but it also spread a lot of diseases, a lot of warfare, a lot of misinformation. I'm going to stop there before I get myself in trouble, and we'll move on. So, yeah, since this is, I know you're fine, and I'm fine with it, but I don't know where this recording is going. So anyway, that's how people in the Pacific, and then of course Captain Cook and all the British and French expeditions went to not all of these, a lot of these islands. They colonized. They took what was there, what they wanted. They had better technology. They had some resistance to diseases, but they had more technology. They had better organization. They had written history. All the stuff that I've seen the last day or two. And then you can see some of these islands, especially the settlement landscapes. You can see mixed global influences. You can see the poverty that Western societies and overpopulation, to be honest, has brought to some of these small islands. You have urban transformation. You have a lot of different cultures coming in, again, overseas. You talked about Darwin being Chinese and Japanese and Australia and the Hawaiian Islands being a mixture of groups of people. And then, of course, New Zealand and Australia, viticulture is part of the big type of economy that they have, which is wines, okay, livestock and stuff like that. So, all right. Yes, we cannot not talk about what happened with Australia and the British coming. Okay, so we think of multicultural Australia. Okay, and do I have a, yes, there we go. This is something I found, it must be 20 years now, but this is from a TV show about the changing demographics of Australia and who we are. They asked the question, who are we? You know, as Australian, who are we supposed to be? And of course, all the British folks and the British doc said, well, the Australians all white, it's all British, it's who we are. But if you actually look at the population, look at the diversity of Australia. It almost matches the United States. Okay. And in terms of percentages, it far exceeds the United States in terms of people from around the world in percentage wise of what our population is. But you could see here, it is still a large percentage, 25%, 23% of British or United Kingdom, sorry. That does not include Ireland, but it includes Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, that's the UK. But it's a very diverse society. And as we move 20 years from when the slide was produced, it has definitely changed more. Okay, it is becoming much more part of Asia than these little tiny islands in the North Atlantic Ocean. Okay, now again, this is over the 150 years of colonization of Australia. Okay, most came from Europe. You'd see 2.2 million came from Europe. But again, there's a whole bunch from Southeast Asia. There's a whole bunch from India that settled in Australia, and North America as well, 128,000. And New Zealand, back and forth from New Zealand, and Micronesia and the Polynesian and South Pacific. So Australia is a very much a multicultural place, despite what the people, the leaders, and much of the population thinks. Okay. Now, there's a terrible story, and we sort of saw this with South Africa too, but this is really beyond that. Australia, who were British, they were British penal colony at first. They tried to limit non-white immigration from the 1900s, the 1900s, all the way up until 1973. This is when I was alive. My parent, your parents maybe, okay? They had this white Australia policy, which did not try to bring in non-whites, which means non-Northern Europeans, okay? That has changed a lot in the last 40 years, but it is actually written, it says white Australia policy only, whites only, which is really terrible if you think about it. But it lasted for a long time, and that's why especially the older generation still thinks Australia is all white. And part of that show that I watched a long time ago, it was On the Fatal Shore, I think the name of it was. It's probably way outdated by now, but the story was that after World War II, when they realized they were so alone, they were isolated, the British weren't going to come help them versus the Japanese, they started rethinking their immigration policy. And when the Brits and the United Kingdom people stopped coming, they said, well, Europe's close enough, maybe some Greeks and Germans, the Greeks and Italians, Polish, Hungarians, maybe not. But again, they're European, so we're going to let them in more. Right. But after World War II, they started to realize that people are not going to come to the rescue. They got to do it by themselves. And since 1973, officially, there've been a lot more folks from around the world allowed in. Again, with this recent populism, right-wing authoritarian governments sweeping the world, Australia sort of got in a little bit of that for a little while. But it is now again open to the rest of the world based upon economy and money. Australia is now much more linked to East Asia and Southeast Asia, and India for that matter, than it is trading partners with Europe. Again, because you're much closer. You're much, much closer. The ties to Australia, to Asia, are much stronger than they were 40 years ago.
But wasn't I reading something about having islands where immigrants have to go to first and then be
Yes.
assessed whether or not they
You're
can
white
come
enough.
in?
Or
Yes, you're white enough to
yes.
come in.
You're white enough.
Still?
Yes.
Like now? Okay.
Not still now, no. But
Okay.
yes, but that was a big deal. There's a couple famous songs about it, and there's a place off of Sydney. Where's Sydney Harbor there? Okay, let me take off these highways and places and borders and stuff. Okay, there's a place outside of Sydney. There's the beautiful Sydney Harbor. Okay, there's Sydney Harbor there. Okay, the bridge should be somewhere over here. Where is the bridge, man? Oh, it's over there. There's Botany Bay. No, Point Botany. So Botany Bay here is an old British song where the ships would dock over here in Australia, Botany Bay area. These little tiny islands off the coast. Here's Sydney up here, sorry. So they would dock here in Botany Bay, and then they'd be allowed in off the coast here. There's a couple places here where they'd wait. They'd be quarantined. They'd go through the white Australia immigration policy stuff. And then eventually some would be let in, some would say you have to go back home. But here's the Sydney Harbor right there. There's the famous bridge, and then right around here somewhere is the Opera House. Where's the dang Opera House? Oh, my goodness. Oh, there it is. Look at all these pictures from the bay. So yes, right off the coast is where they had the quarantine place. Botany Bay is where a lot of the Irish, and there's a lot of Irish songs there. But one of the, I forget which show it was, they had where they kept these boats, and some of these passengers would be there for months, and they actually carved on the rocks the name of their ships, and it showed the Lusitania, which, if anyone knows from World War I history, that was the ship that was torpedoed by the Germans that brought the United States into the war, the Lusitania. But there are towns in Australia that have a lot of different types of migrants, different ethnic backgrounds. There's a lot of native South Indians, like from India, South Asians, Indians living there. And then a lot of the farming communities are all Indian or all Greek. So it's really kind of cool that way. The Aboriginal imprints, again, a lot of them are small little family groups, diverse, fragmented all over the country. The Europeans decimated the population. Part of this white Australia policy was to take the children from the families and turn them into Europeans in terms of culture, eliminating their culture, sending them to schools, making them cut their hair, bleaching their skin in some cases, separating that next generation from the Aboriginal life, trying to westernize them and Christianity, make them Christians and become part of the new Australia. It was, yeah, it's a pretty terrible, if you really think about it, a really terrible history. So what's this nice movie, not a nice movie, an awful movie from the 80s, think Rabbit Proof Fence was one of those, but there was another movie I remember watching about that stripping away the children from families, and then I think one of the girls I remember running back through the outback to go phone their family.
Was that the
Heartbreaking.
Walkabout?
That was a good movie. Oh my goodness, yes, it could be the Walkabout. That was a good movie. So I know it's old. How old is that one? That's an old one.
71.
So I'll have to put Walkabout there. 71. Oh my gosh, maybe it wasn't that old. No, I read the book. I read the book in middle school, I think. I read the book Walkabout, because it, you're, as a teenager, you were starting to go into the adulthood, and what they do around the world, they do different things. And one of the things they do in Australia was a walkabout, which was leave your family and you walk through the desert, you walk through the wilderness, and then you come back a month later. Okay. Other cultures do different things. And I think it's in the South Pacific, there's one island that they tie ropes to their ankles and they jump off the platforms. Here in the United States, we have religious events that say you're now an adult, like communion or confirmation, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, things like that. Shabria, do you know any others that are sort of welcome to adulthood? Things we do in our cultures, yeah.
Quinceañeras and
quinceañeras, yeah, quinceañeras, and in the South it was the cotillion balls, where you go,
yeah.
Here's my daughter, she's 14, she's now dateable.
So horrible of a practice.
But yeah. Yeah. You think about these things that really we did these things? Yeah,
Yes.
we do. And we still do.
Oh, and
that's what quinceañeras are. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Quigley Down Under, I think, had some of that with Tom Selleck, where they showed taking away of children during that movie.
Quigley Down Under. Oh, maybe that. Yeah. Quigley. I'm writing these in the chat room so I could look at them later. Quigley is 2 G's. I don't know.
1 G.
1 D. 1 G.
1 G.
1 G. Yeah. Yeah. There's another there. Yeah. There's a movie called Australia with
Nicole Kidman.
2 Australian actors, Nicole Kidman and the Wolverine guy.
Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman, yeah. Hugh Jackman, yeah. Yeah. So there's the Australian movie there. I'm not sure how, that's more like a World War II history, white savior type movie, if I remember it correctly. But there's others. So if you do have any, and this is for everyone here, if you do have any movies about Australia or New Zealand that you think are really good that I should add to that list, please let me know, and I'll be adding that to the list. Okay. So finally, and we're almost done. I think we're just about done, but the Maori people, these are the native population, native as in 1500 years ago, population of New Zealand islands. And again, it is part of globalization, migration. You have many more people coming in from the South Pacific to New Zealand, again, because of job opportunities. Okay. Let's see, language. I got to move on here. Got to get to the end. All right. So what we're seeing now in terms of Western population ideas and viewpoints of Pacific Islanders, okay, we see the U.S. annexed Hawaii, of course. That was terrible. But we're seeing what we see in our popular culture, right? And I did this a couple of years ago, so Star is no longer with the Panthers, but I was living in Charlotte at the time, so I had to put him on there. Troy Polamalu, the Head and Shoulders commercial guy, right? The Pittsburgh Steeler guy. He's Samoan. Star was Tongan. Jonah Lomu, the New Zealand.
Best football. Best football player. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. And then The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Samoan ethnicity, right? These are sports stars. And this is how a lot of cultures start making their way into the wider American scene, is by having sports stars being the first people to spread the idea that, well, these folks are just like us, right? It's a little difficult. So there's Jonah, and then there's a little video for Jonah there. And then Hollywood, we're seeing this in Hollywood, including The Rock Johnson, went from wrestling to acting. He saved California a couple times, right? There's Keisha Castle Hughes from This Is the Whale Rider, but she was also in Game of Thrones and a real good actress. There she is in Game of Thrones. Jason Momoa, who is on one of the magazine covers that my kids got this week. Aquaman dude. And then Timura Morrison, he was in Star Wars, Django and Boba Fett. I've also seen him in a couple of other movies. And these are just 4 famous people, you know, and this is what we see in terms of popular culture in the United States as Pacific Islanders. That and people, football players, right? Football players on USC especially, right? Like Polamalu. Because football is a way off the Samoan Islands. Again, it's either rugby or football. And I forget where I saw it, but I saw a little quick documentary about Samoans, especially being football players, because again, that was the way off the island, a way to give money to your family to have them survive,
I think
just like in baseball.
Video in our homework.
Oh,
I
good.
think we had
Excellent.
something like that in our homework.
Yes, that's where I put it. Yes, in their homework there. That's where I saw it too. It was a CBS News, something like that, I think.
And like,
oh no, it was on the YouTube playlist.
In Northern California, in Redding, their football team is almost all like Hawaiian, Samoan people, all brought over from Hawaii, from playing over there. And it is a large group. I actually had people from Hawaii working under me because they, in turn, brought their girlfriends and stuff with them from Hawaii. And I had a retail clothing store with women. So
yeah,
a whole bunch of Hawaiian people.
Awesome. I love your stories. They're so cool all the time. So there we go. And again, still you got the British Crown still in charge of Australia, supposedly. I think they're a protectorate or commonwealth or something like that. But we're starting to see the native population having more rights, and again, water rights to the Maori people. Land claims are being brought back to native Australian Aboriginal folks. And not just the worst territories like we did in the United States, but also pretty decent territories where there's water enough for farming and to have their lifestyle from before. So I think that's all the time I think we really have. Sorry about running out of time at the end here, but you got to end on, you know, the transforming the tourism stuff, right? This is what people think of South Pacific, French Polynesia, right? So you go, but it's not all like that, obviously. Okay. All right, so let me stop recording, and then I'm gonna, for those folks who showed up today, I will show. Okay, so we're just about done here, going into your last section. Of course, the chapter overview will have those, and the same thing with the conference Zoom meeting. It'll have the link to this video lecture, but also exam 4 preview. This is similar, again, it's similar to what we saw before, but there's a student learning outcome section, and then the essay section is 1 essay, okay? Questions include something from East Asia. So there's a couple from East Asia, Tokyo, and the eastern portion of Japan in terms of tectonic hazards. Okay, why does catastrophes await southern southeast Japan? Okay, please don't plagiarize from the book. Vulnerable to the sea and land. So we talked about Japan, tectonic plates meeting and what happens there. Second question could be about, is China a world power? Okay, this is a country with 1.3 something billion people, but most of them are in poverty, or many of them are in a large minority are in poverty. So how can you call yourself a world power if you can't even feed your people? Okay, well, you can look at the United States as well, right? But it's your opinion, but you have to paraphrase from readings, support your viewpoint, please, and do not plagiarize. So that's one question there. Describe the evolution of an island, Oceania, and that's the Chucky Darwin thing. Okay, what is an atoll, the islands of evolution, like how it changes over time. So look up those and give an example. Another example, another essay question could be, what are the social conditions of Aborigines and Maoris as compared to the whites in Australia, New Zealand? And how do the social conditions differ from those in Australia than in New Zealand? So compare the Maori and Aborigines to the European white population in the first half, and then the second half do Maori versus Aborigines on the two separate countries. And then the last essay is write an essay which discusses the characteristics and distribution of Japan's population and the urban agricultural divide. So why do they have burgers that are $25 and watermelons that are $50? Okay, and I remember talking with Shibuya in our conference Zoom number 12, talking about this specific topic. I'm sorry, conference Zoom number 10. Number 10 about this specific topic. So population and distribution of population in Japan, and then versus the agricultural sector, and then why are things so expensive to grow there. And of course, you'll have your 2 extra credit questions that you saw every single exam, so that'll be there too. So again, please, of these 5 essays, choose one. I will grade only one. If I see 2, I'll grade the first one. Even if it's 2 sentences, I'm going to grade that one as an essay question. So please tell me which one you're writing. Say, don't grade this one, grade the second one. Okay, just let me know. So thanks so much, folks. I appreciate it. And I hope that you had a great semester. Hopefully we'll be on campus sometime in 2021. If so, stop by. I'm in the Liberal Arts Building, which is the one that is the old building next to the lake by the Science Building. I would love to see some of you and meet some of you and shake your hand or just say hello. It'd be great to see you. So I hope you learned a lot. Please enjoy yourself. And I hope you learn that just because we're in the United States doesn't mean we're better than anyone else. Doesn't mean we're worse than anyone else, but we have our own perspective. And I hope that you saw these different perspectives from around the world.